What you've seen with development of that strategy in the first step, have you seen significant cost benefit kind of layouts? Because honestly, I feel like step one is missing here, step two, which is identifying the products. For a diverse manufacturer who has 5 million SKUs in 200 different countries, lots of recent acquisitions, 60 plus different ERP systems, it seems kind of silly to start with a list of all suppliers. Who are the products? I mean, we could spend 2 years figuring out which products.
Right, so yeah, identifying the products and the suppliers is in the step two. Basically, that's where you get into the due diligence part of it. That's where supply chain and procurement and IT start to come together.
I think it's said, it's kind of hidden there, it says identify suppliers for products containing. So I think in between 1 and 2 is identify those products containing, to your point. You gotta get through those bill of materials,
Yep.
right? And then you might not have the bill of material, right? Because it's a subcomponent that's made for you that you've contract manufactured.
Right.
And it might be 10 subcomponents that somebody else had made for that contract manufacturer.
Or another scenario could be you manufacture, but you just don't have the data from the bill of material analysis. So a lot of times what we suggest is interviewing the engineers that design the products. They have the expertise to determine perhaps to draw that line in the sand where perhaps the exposure is and bringing in different functions of the organization as part of step one to determine which products may be exposed.
And remember that, this is not an absolute due diligence. There's a reasonable due diligence, right? I mean, you can make reasonable assertions to say, okay, I have a capacitor. Okay, I know that almost all capacitors have tantalum in it. Okay, if there's a capacitor, it's in. I mean, you don't have to start going through and proving every piece of, why you made every decision. As long as you document, you have a reasonable approach, you can do it.
Yep.
And it's, you sometimes the data may not exist. You may have to depend on interviews within the company, with the engineers, with the product development groups, with the buyers to say, okay, what do you think is reasonable here? And then work off of that. And there's always a year two. I mean, you take what is considered a reasonable step in year one, and then, you discover more at the end of year one, and then you go to and say, okay, I'm going to correct that or change that in year two as I move forward. And I mean, that's why we used to advocate, a pilot program. This is before the final rule came out, and we said, okay, you have a large company, different divisions. Well, take one piece of it, run a pilot, see, iron out a process, and then say, okay, this is what I learned. These are the strengths in my company. This is where my weaknesses are. And I'm going to improve that going forward. Unfortunately, the time for pilots is slowly closing out as you have to come to a first reporting period.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of companies are receptive to that because they learned a lot, which they could actually then build a real budget. What are the real resources they need extrapolated across your product population? We've seen companies do it at a product cluster grouping, an individual product or parts within a product. And depending on how you group is going to determine how many suppliers you eventually would have to survey. And it's really what level of granularity do you want to get based on your strategy? Where you think, and that's why bringing all this in step one and trying to truly understand what it means to you is going to determine how much effort you do years 1 and years 2, knowing you have the indeterminable category.
You mentioned declarations and certifications, and my recollection with ROHS is that there were harmonized declarations and certifications that evolved in the industries, electronics and others, that were used on an annual basis. So it wasn't just like a one-time check, but it was happening annually type of thing. Is that evolving? Are there harmonized forms that people will use with their supply chain and say, here's the check the box thing, or tell us all this. And that flows into the report.
Repeat the question.
That was a fairly long question.
The question relates to the certifications.
That's why I asked you to repeat it.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I believe the question related to the certifications, if there's going to be standard forms that people are going to be using or how those are being developed. And I think you referred to the child labor situation where.
ROHS.
Okay.
For hazardous materials.
Okay. That is a question that we've received at Dorsey where people have asked us to put together the certifications, but I do expect that we'll start to see standard forms emerging.
Promulgating these on an international, not just a national, but international basis. So I'm wondering if that's happening.
Sasha, are you seeing any of that?
Well,
I'm not as familiar with the ROHS systems that were put in place, but it sounds to me like this is what the EICC is doing with their reporting template. And they had a 1.0 and now they have a 2.0 based on feedback. And so it's basically a form that you send to your suppliers, you know, asking all the different questions and trying to lead back to where the smelters are. So yeah, I think so. And I'm sure they would welcome further input from, you know, anyone else who has it to those reporting templates.
The one thing that I'd add is the actual Form SD is for all 12 months in the calendar year. It's not a point in time. So to the extent that one is exposed in a certain quarter, you would most likely have to include that even if you remediate it by year end. The OECD guidelines does provide some rules around remediation and so on, but it's almost like a profit and loss for accountants. It's throughout the year versus balance sheet a point in time.
And just on that point, in terms of progress, like from our standpoint, we're not looking for perfection on day one. This issue has been around for several years. We've seen some progress. We ranked companies. First time around, the company got 32%. You know, but we praised that company. We're like, it was HP. So, you know, HP, 32%. Wow, great job. You know, they were freaked out at first, right? They were like, oh my God, 32%. Like, we don't score 32% on anything anywhere. But, you know, we were very happy with that because that was, they were taking the first steps. And likewise with this, if there are problems in quarter 1, but they were improved in quarter 4, you know, we are going to say, this company has made so much progress, and people are very receptive to that.
Yes.
As we're talking about best practices, I work in the food and beverage industry, so the products that we sell obviously don't contain any of these minerals. The hot topic is what should we be doing about our packaging? And I'd love to hear any comments or insights. Obviously, it's a legal question that we have to answer for ourselves. But if you're hearing anything about product packaging and where companies are drawing the line on whether it's necessary to the functionality, I mean, we're all ears. And a lot of benchmarks.
So the question is, what about packaging? Is that critical to the functionality of the product?
Paula, do you want to start with that?
Well, it's hours and hours of discussions we've had.
We'll have
at
4
several
different
points.
answers for you if you just hold on.
Yeah, but the one common answer is it depends.
That's the
Yeah,
legal
right.
interpretation.
I mean, it comes down to how vital the packaging is to the product, right? I mean, if it's you know, if it's just a generic packaging that you don't, you know, put a brand. I mean, it's a container in which you ship it. You're indifferent to it. It doesn't play a big role in it. Yeah, it's a no-brainer, right? On the other hand, you know, we feel that, you know, again, I shouldn't say we feel, but we've seen companies that say we put a name on it. It's part of our, you know,
Brand.
value. It's part of the appeal. You know, that packaging is part of the reason why a customer buys it. You know, it's you know, we specifically come out and say now in this kind of a can, you know, this many ounces can, convenient to carry or whatever. It becomes part of your selling process. Then it's a no-brainer. It's included.
So the
problem-
Coors Blue thing, as an example, where it goes blue when it's cold, I don't know.
I think it comes down to whether or not you're contracting to manufacturing your packaging. If you are, then obviously you probably could conclude it's necessary to the functionality of your product because whatever, and I think a lot of folks in the pharma industry are starting to have these discussions that they contract and manufacture all their packaging in order to ship their drugs around the world. If it's just a generic, as Balo said, then probably you could reasonably conclude it's not necessary to the functionality of the product.